saying? I'm saying that somebody's lying to you and doesn't want you to know that there was advanced knowledge before us, and we are not at the pinnacle of knowledge. By a long shot, we're not. Now, I want to go back to make a comment about that transparency and that date you saw on the bottom of it, and using the computer simulations. They go back to 10,500 BC. And that date can't be right. And the reason it can't be right is because there's an assumption being made, and that is assumption that all evolutionists make. It's an assumption that all things have always continued just like they are right now, and you can go back thousands of years with no change. And of course, as Bible believers, we know there was a huge change in this atmosphere and in the way the Lord did things. In Genesis chapter 1, when the Lord puts man in the garden, there is no rain. The Bible says there went out a mist, Genesis chapter 2, there went a mist coming up from the ground to water the whole face of the ground. There was no clouds in the sky, there was no rain during the time of Adam and his succeeding generations, right up to the time of Noah. So there was a change, a great change in the atmosphere. The atmosphere of today is not the same atmosphere of the Garden of Eden of Genesis 1 and 2 and 3. Nor is it the same atmosphere of Genesis 4 and 5 with the succeeding 8, 9 generations after Adam. So for the first couple, about at least the first 1,500 years of man's existence, from the time Adam was created until Noah's flood, the atmosphere was not the same as the atmosphere you have today. And you know what that means? That means all of the evolutionist dating theories are going to be off because they don't acknowledge the Bible. And when you don't acknowledge the Bible, you're going to assume that you can go back with your carbon-14 tests and say the atmosphere has always been like it is. So when this carbon molecule, as it dies off, we can figure exactly how long it takes. So when this living thing dies, from the point it dies, we can date it by how much carbon is in it. Carbon-14, and that assumes that everything's been the same for thousands and thousands of years. Now that's as foolish as can be, and I know for some of you what I'm saying this sounds foolish, because I believe that Adam was created 6,000 years ago when he was placed in a garden, and a mist watered the face of the ground, and there were no clouds in the sky, but there was water overhead. Now, if any scientist, if I took a geologist, and I took a biologist, and I took an anthropologist, and I could put, and I can't do this, but if I could put those three men into the Garden of Eden in 4000 BC, and they go walking through that garden, and they come across a man, and they meet this man, and they say to him, hey, how you doing? And he says, all right, and they ask him his name, and he tells them his name's Adam. And the anthropologist looks at Adam, and he determines what race he is, and he determines he's a Shemite. And he looks at him, and he says to Adam, well, I guess you're about 30 years old. And Adam says, no, as a matter of fact, I'm only about 3 days old. And the anthropologist starts laughing at him and says, now listen, you're a full-grown man. I can tell by looking at you, you're about 30 to 33 years old, somewhere in there. And Adam says, no, as a matter of fact, it's only Monday, and I was just created 3 days ago. And that anthropologist would laugh, and he'd know better because he's smarter, and he'd be sure that Adam was wrong, and he'd be sure that he's right, and it'd be just the opposite. Then I take that geologist, and he goes into that garden, and he starts drilling himself a hole down into the earth, and he starts looking at all the layers of the earth, and he comes across this coal way down there, and he comes across this oil, and he starts dating everything, and he says, this coal bed down here is about 10,000 years old, and Adam says, no, as a matter of fact, that thing's about a week old. And the geologist starts laughing at Adam, and he says, how foolish can you get? We know coal takes thousands of years to form. We know oil takes even longer. It takes all kinds of time to create the oil and all this stuff. And he's got it all figured out, and Adam says, sorry, it's only about a week old. And then you take this biologist, and he's looking at all the trees and the plants, and he's trying to figure everything out. And he takes his chainsaw out, and he cuts down this tree, and he looks at it, and he counts the rings, and he says, Mr. Adam, this tree is about 250 years old. And Adam says, no, as a matter of fact, that tree's only about 4 days old. And that anthropologist laughs at him. And what I'm showing you is that science rejects the Bible, and as a result, they say that everything has been always the same, and they're going to be off in their calculations. Now, that computer simulation you're looking at, that computer simulation of the motions of the stars assumes everything's always been the same, and everything hasn't been the same. That Bible says in Genesis chapter 2, if you look in Genesis 2, I've already quoted it, but Genesis chapter 2, you're going to see that there's a great difference in the atmosphere. Genesis chapter 2 and verse 4. These are the generations of the heavens and of the earth when they were created, in the day that the Lord God made the earth and the heavens, and every plant of the field before it was in the earth, and every herb of the field before it grew. For the Lord God had not caused it to rain upon the earth, and there was not a man to till the ground. But there went up a mist from the earth, and watered the whole face of the ground. So back there in the time when, in 4000 BC, when God created man and put him in this garden, there was no rain upon the earth. That means there's no cloud. The first time a cloud shows up in the Bible is Genesis chapter 9, when the Lord begins to drown everything out. And he says in Genesis